Good morning, everybody. Happy day 3. You're all very bright-eyed and bushy-tailed for day 3 at the AAPC, so thank you very much for being here. Congratulations to all of our campaign excellence winners and 2 of our industry's most influential pioneers, Ed Goaz and Mark Melman. It was inspiring to see that the AAPC is still a place, and perhaps one of the few places, where we can all be brought together with both sides in celebration of something bigger than any of us. Not that. Before we welcome today's panel, I'd like to invite our breakfast sponsor to say a few words. Welcome the Vice Presidents of Politics and Public Affairs at A4 Advertising, Steen McGuire.
Good morning, everybody. Surprised to see so many faces, some of you here, judging by what the bar looked like last night. And I apologize for the lack of mimosas and bloodies at the breakfast buffet. But nonetheless, I hope you all got to enjoy it. We're very excited to kick off day 3 of the conference and introduce this first session of the day, hearing from those that are historically underrepresented in our industry and how they got their foot in the door. At A4, we believe strongly in expanding and diversifying our talent pipeline. We certainly feel like it's worth a much broader discussion, and we hope that you all take an active role in that discussion with us today. So thank you all, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of your day.
Before we get going with the panel today, I want to talk quickly about the Foundation's silent auction that is still happening. So remember, the auction closes at lunch today. We've got 4 awesome prizes, including vacation homes, Broadway tickets, and a wine package. Please remember that all of the funds raised to support the AAPC Foundation's work to protect the industry and promote the next generation of political consultants. Next up, please join me in welcoming the President of the International Association of Political Consultants, Matt Klink.
Thank you, Rebecca. I promise to be brief. There is a reason why they typically give us the day 3 first up slot, but I'm glad some people are here today. I'd like to urge you today to attend our 56th annual conference in Tel Aviv, Israel. That's right, Tel Aviv, Israel, November 12th through 15th. Let's play a quick video, then I'll come back and talk for literally 30 seconds and then be off.
Israel is like any other place you've been to. The Dead Sea is just like any other sea that's located at the lowest point on Earth.
You can float in it?
I am floating. Jerusalem is just like any other 3,000-year-old city that's sacred to 3 major religions, where an imam, a rabbi, and a priest sitting in a coffee shop is not a joke. The food is exactly like in any other place that has Mediterranean fusion flavors that you never knew existed.
Can you pass me the ceviche?
I'm afraid we're all out of ceviche. The people are the same warm, direct, fun-loving people that'll make you feel right at home. Say fish. Fish! Can I have a bite? Tel Aviv's nightlife is the same as any other place, where the bar's closing time is... And just like everywhere else, there are endless soft white beaches with perfectly comfortable weather 300 days a year. Can you give me a hand? Anywhere else?
Israel, exactly like nowhere else.
Dear IAPC members, on behalf of the government of the State of Israel, it's a great pleasure to welcome you all. I truly appreciate the work you are doing in your countries, and I believe that one person can make a difference. Israel is a democratic country with an ancient history and beautiful landscapes and, of course, people. And I would like to invite you to have next year's annual conference of IAPC here in Israel. We have a lot of experience in overcoming difficulties in a challenging regional environment, and I'm sure that you will have very productive and enjoyable visit. So, like we say in Hebrew, see you next year in Jerusalem.
All right. So it's going to be a great conference. The hotel is literally right on the beach. As they said, the bars do never close. And if you want to learn from some of the world's brightest political consultants, and most importantly, if you ever have a desire to do any work in any countries other than the United States, I urge you strongly to come to this conference. Our last conference in London in November was a huge success. Israel's going to be even better and a heck of a lot warmer. Hope to see you there. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Next up, without further ado, I want to introduce the panel who picked their own walk-on song, so judge them as you will. Please welcome Scott, Misa, Christine, Raghu, and Moises.
Good morning. That was my walk-up song that I thought if I ever got to play Major League Baseball, I would choose. So don't judge anybody else if you don't like it, and congratulate me if you do. So my name is Scott Simpson. I am the managing partner of Resonance Campaigns. I think this is going to be kind of a broad panel where we talk about a lot of different experiences that folks have had in different stages of their careers in terms of networking, in terms of getting into bigger organizations and higher levels of campaigns. Our firm, I know, has worked on 2 presidential campaigns. We've worked on Senate races, congressional races, and generally for political consultants, it goes that your career evolves and you get into different places and you get trusted for higher levels of races. So that's the kind of thing we're gonna each talk about and have everybody on the panel give their experience. And I'll ask a few questions and then we'll open it up to some audience questions as we go. So I'm gonna let everybody introduce themselves and go down the line and give a little bit about your experience, how things are going and how this all affects you, and we'll go from there.
I guess I'll start. Good morning, everyone. I'm Misa Boker. I'm the Deputy Executive Director for Campaigns at the DCCC. Last cycle, I was the IE Director at the DCCC as well. So I hope that kind of my perspective on this panel is, having been on the other side of a lot of these pitches, which it's a learning experience, but it also has taught me kind of some of the things that we are constantly looking for when we are evaluating, the best consultants to work on the programs that we are running. And so hopefully we'll be able to share a little bit about the things that I have seen, that I have thought were effective, the approaches that people have used over the last couple cycles that I've been at the committee, that I think are worth, keeping in mind when you're engaging with folks who are making these decisions.
Okay. I'm Christine Fort. I'm a partner with Holtzman Vogel. We are a DC-based political law firm with offices in Virginia, Florida, and now Arizona. I was previously with the NRCC as Deputy General Counsel and also with the Arizona House of Representatives as their Associate General Counsel. And I think my experience is kind of breaking in and getting that initial job in a new network. So I can certainly speak to the power of meetings, making connections, kind of hitting the pavement hard with all of those networking efforts and leveraging those relationships to reach your goals and get where you want to go.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Raghu Devagupthapu. I'm the founding and managing partner of The Left Hook. We are a full-service ad agency, do races up and down the ballot across the country. Over the course of my time in my career, I've had the unique opportunity to be the political director of 2 of the 4 Democratic Party arms, the non-federal ones. And I've been a media consultant since 2009, and I think I can speak to sort of engaging in the federal space and from the consultant side, breaking into doing more work within the federal party infrastructure.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Moises Marino. I am the president and CEO of MBA Public Affairs. I'm also the president of a political action committee called Grow Elect that helps recruit and run Latino candidates throughout California. I've been doing politics for just over 2 decades now, and throughout the whole process, I've learned quite a bit to how to navigate the political landscape and the field in itself. I started doing political, working for the California Republican Party, and after a few years, I ended up opening up my own shop, and it's been an up and down battle, but I think I can say that it's been pretty successful after learning some difficult lessons.
Why don't we start right there, Moises? Why don't you tell us a little bit about the difficult lessons you've learned trying to get and start your own shop, and some of the other things that you mentioned in terms of up and down. Like what have you learned so far?
Well, coming in, into this industry, it was one of those things that definitely not something that you can learn in your political science course. As much as I thought that maybe I would get something from there, but coming in and kind of learning, I realized that it's a type of field where you just kind of learn on the job. I mean, for one, I had difficulty getting an internship. I mean, I never thought that this would be difficult after you graduate from college. They figured, hey, you are an elite. Everyone's going to want to hire you, and that was not even the case, where I couldn't even barely volunteer for an organization. And so, after being able to land an internship, it was just the beginning of trying to work, the industry, and it was an uphill battle all throughout. The first few years, I think that I spent a lot of time doing manual labor. Obviously, on campaigns, there's a big need for people running errands, people knocking on doors. I got spent doing a lot of sort of carrying stuff back and forth. I always like to say that one of the cool things I got to do is I got the opportunity to sweep around the building of where I used to work. Now, that might seem like a difficult thing to do. Or kind of hectic, but for me, it was an opportunity when I was given that chance to do that. And I swept those floors beautifully every single morning. and it was an opportunity that I got to do, and I did that day in and day out. And after a while, I thought to myself, you know what, it'd be cool if I can start, I love sweeping, but it'd be cool if I could start doing some other stuff. So I went to, and I got my master's degree. And after I got my master's degree, I came back and says, hey, now I'm a little bit more versed in the art of politics and policy. And they're like, oh, you got a master's degree, great. Now maybe you can sweep twice as fast. And so, I spent a little bit more time, but eventually they did let me into the building. And once they let me into the building, now the game was over from there. I started doing a lot of data entry, a lot of kind of menial tasks. But one thing that I did get to learn while doing my data entry is I got to learn about numbers. And once you kind of figure out what these numbers are and how they play in the grand scheme of things, I became very knowledgeable in terms of what I was doing, the sort of data entry. And the situation came up where all of a sudden, I knew all sorts of numbers about all sorts of things, and they were trying to wonder, hey, what's going on here? What's our projection and our turnout? And all of a sudden, I would spit out numbers like no other, and they were like, how do you know that? Years of data entry, and that's just how it works. And I got recruited to be, kind of a strategist internally for Arnold Schwarzenegger's campaign out in California. And from there on, I became the numbers guy. Numbers guy, they kind of put you out there and do some stuff, but eventually I was able to use that niche to understand the field more and kind of get and talk to certain people, and the rest was history from there.
Great. Well, that is fascinating. Misa, as somebody who's been someone who hires consultants and sometimes hiring consultants who maybe haven't worked for the committee that you were working on or done, let's say, independent expenditures or anything else, what are the things that you look for in a firm that's new to the organizations you're working at, or what's helped people actually break in, so to speak?
Yeah. So I think the tricky part about this is that we're constantly, if we're doing it right, we're constantly trying to balance having the institutional knowledge, especially when you think about the IE. It's high volume, it's fast paced. So you're balancing the institutional knowledge with the need for new and fresh and different perspectives, right? And so I think part of it, one, is this is responsibility that I think are on us as staffers, is to make sure we're doing our due diligence and doing the outreach to get to know other consultants who don't have the natural entry points into the committee space, right? Like they don't have the relationships, they may not know how to navigate the RFP process, they may not even know that, we're releasing requests for proposals on certain kinds of work. And so I think, one, taking it upon myself to make sure I'm making the rounds with folks, taking recommendations from the consultants that I have worked with in the past, to just kind of meet and talk to some of the consultants who are newer to the congressional space. And I think that's been helpful for me last cycle in terms of identifying the firms that are prepared, not just tactically to do the work, but also can help fill in gaps that we have as part of our program. And so, I think the things that are helpful are the meetings, right? I make it a point to do meetings with any consultant who wants to talk about the D-Trip, talk about the kinds of work that we give out, talk about the process, talk about the timeline. I think that's the hardest part, is people knowing like when things are coming online and how long they will be open for so that they can have an opportunity to submit for them. But the new consultants that I've been the most encouraged by are the ones who are, interested in learning more information and just kind of like take it upon themselves to, when they talk to you, ask you all the questions that they have, ask you all the questions that help them navigate the process, ask you what you're looking for. I think that's one that, there are different ways to think about the work that we are hiring, and sometimes just like getting more information from that person about like what kinds of questions are top of mind for you, what kinds of challenges are you anticipating with your program that you have to solve for or are trying to solve for by hiring certain consultants. Just getting a little bit into that person's head in terms of what their considerations are when hiring for that work, so that you know how to tailor, whether it's your proposal at the beginning of the process, or it's, if you get an interview, the conversation, how you are responsive to some of the challenges that that person is thinking about programmatically, I think can be, can give a bit of a differentiated edge to folks who are, especially the ones who are new to the process.
Got it. I mean, I think a lot of this boils down to like establishing relationships with people and getting into it. And Christine, you mentioned that you've networked in 2 different cities and kind of started over when we were talking earlier. Can you tell us a little bit of like what your overall strategy is to networking and what you think kind of the best things that people can do and mistakes that people sometimes make?
Sure. First, after law school, I moved up to DC, and I think the best advice I was given was to take every meeting that you can. It's kind of a full-time side job when you're trying to get to your next step. And when you're at those meetings, don't leave without letting or asking the person for one more contact that they think would be helpful for you, so that your networking efforts don't dead end. So after doing that over and over and over, this web of people kind of started to be developed that I met and I had established connections with, and that allows you, when you do get that big meeting or that big interview, or you're in a pitch with the D-Trip and you don't otherwise have a connection there, that will allow you to have an army of people that can kind of come in and might have the relationship with that person that you're meeting with and follow up and recommend you, sing your praises, and it just helps reinforce that new contact that you've just made. And never underestimate the value of a single connection, because it only takes one. And we all know this industry is all about relationships, and that one connection that you made can be your in for the pitch, the new work, the new job, and that's how I ultimately got my first job in DC with the House Oversight Committee, was just through a lot of networking. And then I moved over to the NRCC, and I moved to Arizona after meeting my husband on a congressional recount. So political fairy tale for the ages. But I had to start all over in Arizona, and I kind of followed that same protocol with just taking every meeting I could, establishing that relationship, asking for someone else they think might be helpful or insightful, and eventually that led to a job with the Arizona Chamber and then the Arizona House of Representatives. So just, don't get discouraged, I think, because sometimes it can feel a little bit fruitless, but you just never know when that one connection that's going to change things can happen.
And can I also just like add something? I think it's important to also leverage people who have done the thing that you're trying to do, right? Like, so in our context, if you are interested in working with the D-Trip or any other committee, like look for some of the other consultants who are kind of, or were similarly situated as you, right? Like, who are the ones that are newer in that ecosystem? Who are the ones who, they've done their first cycle or their second cycle, so they're still new to the committee space, but have relationships with those people, talk to them about how they navigated the process, talk to them about why they think they got the work, right? Like, and what have they learned by doing the work a cycle or 2 cycles, right? Like, and really get into what it means to kind of like try to go into that space, and from someone who effectively did it, because I think that can be helpful to draw from too.
Can I, we should contextualize some of this though. I mean, look, I think patience is a really important word, which can be frustrating for a lot of folks because, all of us have gotten at some level into this industry to create some sort of social change, right? And so to sort of like jump in head first and build a business that's trying to create social change and be told to wait, your turn can be frustrating for a lot of people, right? And frustrating for me. One of the things that I think is worth outlining, though, is in how I would define patience and process. Look, when I'm going to channel Misa for a second, when you're her, when I was her 12 years earlier, you have a responsibility in terms of the product that you are pushing out, right? And so to the point of, and so with the responsibility of the spend comes the need for comfort of how that work has been done, right? And so, which, for layers of accountability, it makes some of these pieces hard. And there's like a lot of steps that I think get into how you start working with the committee. The first place might not actually be the independent expenditure. It's like, at some level is, what is the work that you're doing? And what is your user experience as a consultant with the other people that are at the table? That's like step one in process is, how does your work show? And that's not just product. That's actually, what are your layers of accountability to work with the broader infrastructure, which sort of creates your support from a baseline. The second thing is oftentimes like a hard side practice. Doing the campaign side is probably going to elevate you to a place to enable you to get more party work, right? Because when the people that are making decisions in a committee sort of see your interaction on the hard side of a campaign, how are you driving strategy? How do you interact with that campaign team? How does your product look? Is it timely? Is it strategic? All of those pieces sort of then factor into sort of how you make a step to getting more committee business, right? The step after that is then actually breaking in and getting some committee work. And when you do, the big thing about the committee work is a lot of people don't get it's a process. You have to have the infrastructure to build out the layers of accountability to make sure that processes are moving within the confines of their structure. Because I've obviously not worked with the Republican committees, but I'm pretty sure it's the same, that it's a grind, and making sure that you don't have to rewrite a script that's coming to you. That's process. And so, I mean, these are the pieces that that all of them sort of foundationally add up to being able to do more committee work.
I think to that end, there are two sort of items that I have personally found very valuable in this industry. Number one, how do you showcase value for yourself? You talk about breaking into the network is, how do you distinguish yourself from everybody else? And the way you do that is you show value. How is whatever you are good at, what is it that you are producing is different and high quality, I think is something that you were mentioning. And number two, and this is something difficult for many of us, especially for me, is how do you market that value afterwards? So, I had a boss who used to say half of it is doing the work, the other half is telling people that you did it. And that other half is actually the difficult part that I found. As an introvert in the field of extroverts, it was very, very, very difficult to show up to an event and try to engage people. One thing that I think had to come to realize is that if I wanted to make it, I needed to feel comfortable with being uncomfortable. And that's constantly in that mode. And in the minute I found that I'm very comfortable, I've become very complacent, and you stop having that edge. You stop distinguishing yourself, and at that point, I think you stop having these insiders and people who are gonna look at you notice what you're producing. So I think those 2 points are always very important in this industry.
I think that's a really good point, Moises. I think one thing that I had as a realization was we did this really important Senate race and we won. And the next morning I was talking to a consultant who wasn't on the same side of the wall as me. And he very quickly was like, well, of course we won this race because of what we just did on the IE side of knocking a whole bunch of doors. And I was like, oh my gosh. The whole point here is to take credit for what we just did, to say that we won. I was like, I didn't realize what game I was in, and I had to be like, well, what's my story of why we won? Because we hadn't won that big of a race before, but it clearly became a thing like, oh, I've got to tell everybody else that this is why we won, which I don't think I was naturally comfortable saying, like, we're the only reason, but I think that was a really important thing to do. Raghu, what do you think is the key of like taking you've gone into Senate races now from having done a lot of House races. Talk about how you come up with like showing people the examples of what makes you ready for like the next level of stuff you're gonna do.
Yeah, some of it's dumb luck. Look, the problem with, to go back to the patient side of this, is we're only as good as the map, right? And we're only as good as the opportunities that the map provides, which, there are some very talented consultants who over the course of my career I saw never have a shot to get a very, very large race. And part of the reason why is because there was never an availability to it, right? And so that's a piece of this. But then the second piece of this is I think you have to, it's a tough question. So I think there's two things here, because we started talking about the networking right away. I think the networking stuff is as important, so I have this foundational belief, right? A skill set and network is how you're gonna grow your business, and they're both, and they're equally important. And early in your career, your skill set, and early in your consulting practice, I would tell you your skill set is the most important. And then the network kind of comes with it, and you build. When you make the transition to doing statewide races, I think the skill set becomes the most important again. Because the thing about a statewide race is, especially a Senate race, is that the press on a Senate campaign is far different than any other race that we're gonna do in the country, because not only are we dealing with the winds of the national environment on a daily basis, but we're also dealing with the local press corps. So the rigor is significant. And the only way I think that, so it becomes less about product and it becomes a lot more about strategy. And so the only way that you sort of can do that is to be able to sort of, again, showcase work at the other levels that sort of define the similar circumstances that a statewide race has. As a practice grows, I think you need to, look strategically at how can I actually show with my team that we are capable of handling this work. And I think that you've got to make strategic choices to sort of do that. And unfortunately, those opportunities might not exist. Again, due to the fact that there might not actually be a race that's statewide that actually has a team that needs to be built. Like all the teams are already built because they're all a bunch of reelects.
One other thing I'm curious about from folks is like, what are, sometimes you see other people do things and sometimes you make mistakes or you see other people make mistakes. What are things that you've seen people do as they try to get, one of the things I've seen that I think is probably the biggest mistake is thinking that is expressing too much that you think you're entitled to do a certain set of work, right? And communicating that in a way that I think people find kind of ridiculous and laughable. But what are other things that you've seen people do in terms of networking or like moving their careers forward that are the don'ts of this whole thing?
I wouldn't, a lot of times when you don't get something, I feel like there's a bad consultant habit of like trying to blow up if you don't land a piece of business, right? So when you get a call saying you don't get work, how you actually like receive the news and how do you interact with that, I think is important. Because I think I used the word user experience earlier. And to me, this is like the biggest piece of this is every interaction you have as a consultant, whether it be to another consultant, whether it be to a party committee, whether it be to a young manager who's up and coming in the industry, every time you have an interaction with them, it's a user experience. And you gotta walk away recognizing that what did that person or that institution take away from the user experience with me? And if it's not positive, work's probably not coming. And so like oftentimes we win with sugar before we win with salt. And I think that come on, our industry is small, right? And so all of these interactions and experiences will center back to you. And I think that it's really important to sort of have the context of that as you move to sort of grow a practice.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense. Christine, you have thoughts on mistakes you've seen other people make or ones that you think you might have made as you're trying to grow your business or move along in this industry?
Kind of tacking on to what we were just talking about, and at least in the legal profession, I know it's a little bit different than the general consulting, but the user experience. And that can be twofold. That could be with opposing counsel. A lot of people take a more aggressive approach to that. I think there's a lot to be said for kind of establishing the relationship and a little bit of a rapport and trying to work things out rather than just dropping bombs and being rude and not otherwise cooperative or trying to reach a solution. And then on the client side as well, every time a candidate comes to you or a party committee comes to you asking a question, what's the turnaround time? What's the product? Is it usable? Is it just kind of a lot of lawyer language? And I know lawyers are not everyone's favorite people, mine included, but I think there's a way to, at least in our profession, provide that user experience, provide value, and the client's left with a good taste in their mouth and a great experience, and that is a way that people talk, and especially in this industry. And I think that's definitely a way that that you can provide that value and get business and grow from there.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I have another don't, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Which is, this might be bad business advice to some, but when we first launched our shop, we explicitly didn't overcommit our resources. Like, I was really conservative about the amount of work that we took on. Because I just felt like I had a responsibility to make sure that the product showed as effectively as possible my first time out when I was in charge of my shop. And so, the irony of this, it was 2018, and every congressional race won for a Democrat, and I probably turned down 5 of them that are still in the House right now. I literally turned down 5 races. Probably not a fan of the decision today, but I also don't think that my practice would be what it is today had I not been really thoughtful about the work I was going to take on then.
Can I just add, one is to like double down on what Raghu said, just in terms of, you know, what happens if and when you don't get a thing, right? Like there's always going to be work, and there are now more media consultants than frankly I can count, right? Like every time you're doing this, it seems like there's more and more and more consultants. And so there are a lot of incredible people who do really great work, and everyone won't get the business. And so inevitably, you will not get business. And I think how you respond to that, especially with the folks who are on the other end of that, right, like will inform whether or not there's another thing on the horizon that they'll be hiring for, and they think of you because you did a great job going through that process. You demonstrated your value, you know, and kept yourself top of mind, and that person then thinks about your firm or you kind of as an individual, and positioned you for that next opportunity, or gives you a heads up about that next opportunity that you would be perfectly situated for. So I think the takeaway is like, don't be an asshole. And I think people will want to work with you, right? Like, and people want to do everything they can to help you. So I think that's really important. The other thing I'll say that I've seen is, you know, everyone has to do the homework, right? Like if you are not of the Senate landscape and you want to break into Senate races, if you're not of the House landscape and you want to break into House races, whatever, or even if it's like an organization or issue advocacy space, like understand the context that you're walking into. Like I've seen a ton of people, you know, pitch for work or talk to me about particular aspects of our work and not have the context for the thing that they say they want to do. So I think doing your homework, understanding like what makes congressional races a little bit different than the other work that I've done, and what do I need to, how do I fill that knowledge gap or that context gap to be able to speak fluently to why I make sense for this particular work. I've just seen people kind of take what has worked generally, right? Like the slide deck that works for everybody, and then that's the slide deck for you trying to pitch the IE. Well, this isn't responsive to what the IE is, how it functions, what the rhythms are, what the pace is, what our considerations are, how it's set up structurally, right? Like, and its limitations. And so, you know, I think that's an easy way that I can spot that like people haven't done their homework because they don't understand the context in which they're saying the things that they want to do.
That's great. I think that's really helpful. I think we have a couple minutes for questions from the audience. If folks have things they want to ask the panel, I think there's mics. If you just want to raise your hand, it's early, but you get extra credit if you ask questions now of the 8:30 or 8:45 panel, because you all got up, which is amazing. Or if we've answered all your questions. Oh, there we go. Oh, thank you.
Hello. Hi, good morning. I was hoping you can talk about like a lot of us who work with candidates and sort of taking them through the sort of baby steps of their career and seeing them ascend to office and what that relationship looks like. I think you touched about it working with the committees, but for those who've worked with candidates, I think it could be helpful to talk about some experiences of like helping them graduate to the next level and nurturing their careers as they move forward.
Anybody want to, Raghu, you want to?
Sure. And I think part of my practice from being a non-federal consultant into getting into federal races, the luck of it is having a couple of state legislative clients I ran for Congress. I think that there's some things that have to be separated when you're working on the, with the candidate side. The candidate's work has to come first, right? In terms of so a candidate, the value that a consultant provides is, I think, important in the context of getting committee work, right? And so if you are a candidate that is running for federal office, as a consultant, a year and a half before you're ever doing any product for that campaign, part of the responsibility, at least I see it as part of the responsibility, is to advocate on behalf of your client, right? And how you show yourself in your advocacy is not only tied to the candidate, it's tied to your business. And so as you make those steps, you are understanding these are the things that the candidate needs to do to be successful, whether it be advocating within the steps of a building or, to a donor community, for the candidate's success. It's also then that you're demonstrating the candidate's ability to navigate that effectively, which shows that you have the ability to navigate the confines of your party and the process. And so I think the connection through that is, again, it's a great and unique opportunity to sort of show your work, and it's not just product.
I think we have another question.
Hey, this is a question regarding pricing. When you talk to a client, when you're making a pitch, what's the right time to talk about your price? Number one. Number two, how do you know what to quote? Thank you.
What to quote?
What to quote in terms of how much you charge the client.
Got it. Well, I mean, I think a lot of the things that we do, the way that, at least for Democratic consultants, price things, it's pretty standard. I can speak from my experience of doing direct mail, right? We charge just for the direct mail. Usually, I can say from our experience, pricing doesn't usually tend to be the deciding factor. Like most mail firms who work within a certain stratosphere have pretty much close to the same pricing. And sometimes we adjust it and sometimes things go up. But I think and I think it's a lot more standardized with big committees and things where we reply to RFPs. But I think everybody who's gonna hire you has to be prepared to deal with paying for you, right? And I think that's different if you have a retainer versus if you're getting paid for a product. But I think that's for us at least how it works. Raghu, is there anything?
Yeah, or
Moises?
either one of us. I mean, I think one of the things, and credit, Misa, I think you've done this really well, is for new firms that are trying to break into that space, this is where doing your homework is really helpful, right? So this is where you have the opportunity, hopefully, you can have conversations with other consultants who are already doing that work, or you can have a direct conversation with the committee, folks themselves to sort of walk through how have they typically seen pricing? Because most of the time they're going to, for IE work, you get hired and they basically tell you how you're getting paid, right? And you have a conversation in the middle of that about this is probably where you want to tweak something to have it make sense or not. But so I think the exercise should be, in the networking phase of this, is actually asking the questions of how is compensation, typically handled? I want to make sure I'm in the ballpark, and that's probably like the first step.
I think fees are very interesting because my experience has been that if you charge too low, you won't be appreciated because they will see you as a discounted price at the 99-cent store. If you charge too much, you'll look like you're trying to pull a fast one, and that reputation will kind of follow you as, be careful because you'll try to get ripped off. So you have to be very kind of careful and do your research and try to get somewhere in the middle. And when you start off, you have a little bit of break, but as your sort of value increases, your sort of what you're able to charge is more justified over time. So, something to kind of keep in mind.
Can I just say, I think that, there's been more transparency, at least speaking for some of the committee stuff. There's been more transparency in terms of where we want the pricing to be. So I think when we're releasing RFPs, we usually will try to put in there, the scope of that contract, right? Like give you a ballpark figure of like what you can expect if you were to get this work. So I think we've been trying to be more transparent in that regard. The other thing I'll say is, sometimes, especially with newer firms, minority-owned firms, sometimes, right? Like some people can't afford to accommodate the committee's kind of like pay structure and amount, right? Like the way we compensate people, like to some extent, sometimes it is insufficient, but we have to think about the bigger picture, right? Like, and that we're hiring for so many aspects of the work. But I think there are creative ways to structure a contract that make sure you can be responsive to the committee's kind of budget realities and responsibility, while also making sure you are compensated fairly, right? Like, so thinking about things like, okay, if you can't get the flat fee or the commission percentage to be where you want it to be, is there, do you think about combining that with some kind of like retainer for doing some general advising? We've structured it that way with other firms that we've worked with. Is there like a win bonus or something that you could kind of do to get you something else on the back end? So I think not just thinking about like, what are the percentages, what's the flat fee and all of that, but like, how can you combine a couple of different things to get to where you need to be in terms of the compensation that you want? And people will be willing to like have that conversation because I think it's unequal, right? Like firms are coming to this from different places. And so I think that's a good conversation to kind of engage people on.
Well, great. Well, again, thank you, all of you, for getting up so early. I know it's not that. Mostly we all work this early, right? But thank you for being here. Thank you to everybody on the panel. I think this was fantastic and hope you all enjoyed it and enjoy the rest of the day.